What's the most awkward situation you've ever been in? When I was a kid, we were on holiday and decided to go to a church. While we were there, I decided that I would be funny if I would slap my dad's ass with both hands. So I ran in full speed to maximize the impact of the slap. I ended up slapping a stranger who also happened to walk next to a woman with a stroller in his hands, which made me think it was my dad. It was even worse that my parents saw it as well. When I was a kid, I hugged a random dude because I thought it was my dad. Even better how this dude's son was standing next to him. My 79-year-old mother-in-law with Alzheimer's telling us that she had had sex the previous night with another resident of her nursing home. She had been celibate for 20 years up until then, we think. Not awkward for me, but I was the reason for it. I served for a couple years and worked multiple restaurants in that time frame. I worked at a Dennis, night shift. Best and worst job for many reasons. Anyways, there was a regular that came in often. Drunk as a skunk and nasty as hell. He tipped really well but was so nasty to us girls. It never fazed me, so I served him often. He offered many times to pay for extra service and tried to get me to leave with him often. Of course I never did, but a couple months later I am working a new place. Little more high end. I work mornings here. And this was a Sunday morning church rush. Guess who was sat in my section? My nasty regular from my last job with his entire family. His wife, kids, parents, the whole group. Fresh out of church. The look on this man's face when I walked up and said hello. He was red as a fire truck. And I made it worse by asking if he remembered me. He left me a huge tip. Probably because I didn't bring up his nasty mouth and grabby hands from his late drunken nights. Edit, I was a waitress. That's what I meant by serving. One time in college, I snuck into my Ra's room and hid under the blanket on his top bunk. My goal was to scare him when he came in and settled down a bit. He ended up coming in with his girlfriend and began making out with her. After a good lifetime couple moments, I jumped up and ran out. No saving it. Okay, I already posted in this thread, but I remembered something even worse. When I was in 2nd grade, my brother and I would always be picked up after school by my dad. We had a green van with a red stripe on the side. So my brother grabs my hand and storms us up to the car. He rips open the door, sits us down, buckles me in, and then says, "Can we get McDonald's on the way home?" Apostrophe. We both look up and there is 2 middle-aged adults sitting in the front seat that are obviously not our family. They stare at us. We stare at them. In my little brain, we've been staring at each other for at least 10 minutes at this point. My brother unbuckles me, unbuckles himself. We get out and walk away. No words were exchanged. We then checked who was in the car before getting in from that point forward. A gentleman was outside the hotel smoking in his holy jogging pants. I really wanted to tell him his balls were showing, but I couldn't summon the courage to do it. He wanted to chat about Magic the Gathering. I was a teenager with a boner. Pretty standard so far. I walked downstairs and had to tuck it in my pajamas so the head is sticking straight up and the erection is pinned against the body so the boner isn't noticeable. Well, when I put my t-shirt on, it fell behind the tip, so if you looked at my wasset line you could clearly see the tip of my penis. I was talking to my mom for a few minutes and she was flushed red in the face and quickly trying to kill conversation. Not something my mom is known for. I walked away, saw what was going on and didn't know what the hell to do. We never discussed it, but because things were so awkward at dinner, I'm pretty sure my mom knew that I realized it happened as well. I was sitting in class and the kid next to me farted and I said "God bless you" as if it were a sneeze. I walked in on my roommate in senior year of college banging his girlfriend. We had a rule about a hat on the door if we wanted privacy. There was no hat when I came back one morning and I got a full eye level side view of him and her mid thrust because he had the top bunk. They kind of laughed it off but was pretty awkward for me. I was riding in the passenger seat with my mom, who has always been strict and very tight-knit several years ago, when for some reason she decided to completely open up to me about all of her drug experimentation and sexual exploits in the 60s, and the time she did cocaine with Steve Jobs at a fancy restaurant in the 80s. It was a very uncomfortable eye-opener and I was trapped listening to it. Okay, so me and some friends were at a restaurant and a buddy of mine was telling us about this new girl he just started going out with a few days back. Well, another friend started telling us about this girl that he banged the previous night. The conversation went on for a minute and finally somebody asked for the name of the girl that he had banged, and it turns out it was a girl that the other friend had started dating a few days earlier. Q narrowly avoided fight as we convinced him it's better to find out she's shitty now rather than later. The two guys still no longer speak though. Most George Costanza moment of my life. I was flying back home from a business trip in GA. Before we all got on the airplane, everyone noticed that we would be flying with 3 military K9s and their handlers. All good. Point being, everyone noticed them. And if they hadn't, the pilot was kind enough to point them out when he came over the intercom to give his spiel. A round of applause for our service members and their brave working dogs was given. Hours later in the flight, the flight crew had turned off the lights. I needed to take a piss and moved forward in the cabin toward the restrooms. Well, one of the dogs was black and I didn't see his paw sticking into the aisle. Cue the dog yelping and crying. Have you ever had 150 people hate you before? It was made so much worse by the fact that I am a veteran and I love dogs. I am the son of a veteran who was a K9 handler when he served. But how the heck am I going to explain that to a plane load of people giving me the stink eye for being the arsehole who stepped on the dog, George? It was a black dog, Jerry, and the lights were out, George. The lights were out, Jerry. I used to run a restaurant and had inherited an employee with a slew of mental health issues. She had massive anxiety issues and just couldn't handle the pressure of working in a restaurant. She'd break down and cry over simple mistakes if she felt she was making too many. It was extremely unfortunate, but I was terribly underprepared to coach someone like that. One day, during downtime, the cooks were shooting the shit and recounting stories of weird ex-co-workers. I opened up my yap and said, who was the one who kept crying every time they'd screw up? She was 2 featuring away and literally responded with me, apostrophe. My best friend waiting to tell her parents that she's gay until when I was over for dinner. When I was a kid, my family's van broke down, so we all had to squeeze into my dad's car to go to a funeral. Anyways, my older sister had to sit on my lap. Yep, you guessed it. I got a boner and she freaked out and started screaming. I was in the car with my girlfriend's best friend's moms and her other daughter. We made talk in the car and I just ended up asking what their favorite color was. They then told me the other daughter was actually blind. I had barely known these people and was in the car for another 20 minutes. Most awkward 20 of my life. My mom and I were in the car and the vehicle in front of us had a fake taxi sticker on it, and my mom asked me what a fake taxi was. I don't know if this is really the most awkward, but it was def awkward. I visited my bio dad's old church in Mississippi a few years ago and spoke to his old preacher for a moment. One important detail for this story is that my dad died when I was 7, so a pretty good while back. My grandma told the preacher who I was. This is Pomelo Sr., his daughter. Pomelo, apostrophe, preacher, OHH, Pomelo Sr. Tell him I said hi for Mimi. Sure thing. My grandma's face was priceless. We agreed the preacher would feel really awkward when he remembered later that my dad was dead. I am someone who never feels awkward and doesn't get embarrassed, but this moment got me good. I was doing orientation for my college. I wanted to meet the dean of my department and make a good impression. I walk in his office and he is bent over behind his desk looking for something. I introduce myself and stick my hand out to shake his hand. He sits up and he has no arms. I look at him and look at my hand and I am freaking out. It felt like my hand was out there for an eternity and I did the only thing I could think of to do. I ran my hand through my hair and tried to play it off. He never said anything and just started talking to me, but I felt like I was actually going to die of embarrassment.